This video is regarding Chapter 1, Section 2, Linear Measure. So the objectives and reasoning for why we are learning this information. What are we going to do? We are going to be measuring segments and calculating with those measures. So why are we learning this? Well, when the ancient Egyptians found a need for a measurement system, they used the human body as a guide. The cubit was the length of an arm from the elbow to the fingertips. Eventually, the Egyptians standardized the length of a cubit with 10 royal cubits equivalent to 1 rod. Why do we need standardized units of measure, and how do you standardize units of measure on a daily basis? If you think about this, if you have someone who is taller, the length from their elbow to their fingertips is going to be longer than if you have someone who is shorter, and that's why it was renamed to a royal cubit, because it went by the pharaohs. The first term we're going to learn is a line segment. Again, you should know this term, but we're going to unify our understanding of the topic. So a line segment looks like this. A segment is named by its endpoints. A and B are considered the endpoints because they are the points located at the end of the segment. It can be named AB or BA. Please note that this has a segment line above it with no arrows, which says it has a beginning and an end. Since it has 2 endpoints, it can be measured using a ruler or any other type of measurement system. The measure of segment AB is written as AB with no symbol on top of it. So anytime you see 2 letters with no symbol on top of it, that means you are looking for a measurement. That is a very important thing that you need to understand. Again, this is read. The measure of segment AB is written as the capital letters AB with no symbol on top of it. This means you are looking for a number answer. The length or measure of a segment always includes a unit of measure. So the unit of measure, again, is inches, feet, yards, centimeters, millimeters, and it could also just be U for units. Here is an example of how we measure on a number line. So if we find the length of segment AB, A starts at 0 and it goes to a number that is between 1 and 2. So if I go here and I count, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 segments. So that means it's going to be 1.8 centimeters. And I know it's going to be centimeters because that is the measurement at the left of the ruler. 1.8 is here, but it has millimeters, so that's not going to be my correct answer. And all of these are in millimeters. So since I know all of these are in millimeters, I know that there are 10 millimeters per centimeter. So this is 10 millimeters plus 8 millimeters means my answer is going to be 18 millimeters. Here is an example for you to try. Here is another example. In this case, we are using inches. So if I find the length of AZ, A starts at 0 and goes to this segment here. So this is in inches. Inches are not broken up by tenths. Inches are broken up with the longest segment being the whole number, then the next longest being a half, then the next longest being a quarter, then the next longest being an eighth, then the next one being a 16th. So between 0 and 1, each of these tiny little segments is a 16th. If I look here, it goes from 0 to 1, and then it goes to the half mark. So therefore, the answer for this measurement is find the length of AZ should be D, 1.5 inches. Please find the answer for question B. The next topic that we are going to discuss is betweenness of points. And I know the word betweenness sounds like a funny term. If something is between, that means it is in the middle of it. But betweenness of points is we're talking about the point itself. So for any 2 real numbers, A and B, there is a real number n that is between A and B such that A is less than n and n is less than B. This lets us come up with the following statement. Therefore, point N is between points A and B, but point R and point P are not in between. So N, I say, is between A and B, but when I'm talking about the whole thing, I'm talking about betweenness. So here are some key concepts that you need to remember when you're dealing with betweenness of points. Point M is between points P and Q, and this if and only if is a geometry term, which means that everything that I'm saying has to be true. So points P, Q, and M are collinear, and PM, so that means the distance from P to M, plus the distance from M to Q adds up to the distance from P to Q. Another way to think about it is that the two smaller parts that are together add up to the bigger point. Please notice that both PM and MQ have point M in common. Here is an example. Find BD. Assume that the figure is not drawn to scale. That means that this does not necessarily have to be exactly 50.4 millimeters. So I want to find the length of BD, so how am I going to do that? Well, I know that BC plus CD gives me the whole thing. And I apologize, it is very difficult to draw on the computer. So all I am going to do is add up 16.8 and 50.4, and that will give me my answer of C, 67.2 millimeters. Please notice that even though I am not saying it as I'm going through the video, you must make sure that your answer has units. Here's an example for you to do. Now in this example, it says find TU. Well, TU is right here. Assume the figure is not drawn to scale. However, I know that the whole thing is TV, and this little part here is UV. Well, I know that TU plus UV equals TV. Notice that U is in both of these segments, and when I add them, it goes away. That means it is between. In this case, I would take TU and make it X. UV, I'm going to make 1 3/8. And TV is going to be 3. So really all I have to do is take 3 and subtract 1 3/8. Now some people might be intimidated by this because it has a fraction, so you can always count up. If I add 5 to 3, that gives me 8. So 5/8 is going to be my fraction, and that rounds this up to a 2. 3 minus 2 is 1. So 1 5/8 should have been the correct answer. Here is an example with algebra connections. So I'm given a word problem. It says find the value of x and st if t is between s and u. St is equal to 7x, su is equal to 45, and tu is equal to 5x minus 3. At this point, some of you might become overwhelmed because there are so many letters and numbers. So the first thing that you should do when faced with a word problem in geometry is to draw a picture. It helps to clarify what exactly we're looking at, and it helps to simplify and streamline the problem. So here is my line with points. You could also draw a segment. I know that T is between S and U. So I'm going to put S here, U at the other side, and T is going to be the point in the middle. It does not matter if these points are accurate. It does not matter if this length should be shorter than this length. All this picture is doing is giving me a frame of reference to organize my information. Now I'm going to take ST, being 7x, and put it below ST. SU is 45. I'm going to put it on the top. And TU is 5x minus 3, so that's going to go below. So now I know that these two parts add up to this whole. The picture makes more sense. Step 2 is going to be to write an equation. Well, I'm going to add the two parts and set it equal to the whole. Now I'm going to solve for x. 12x minus 3 is equal to 45. I add 3 to both sides. And then I'm going to divide by 12x, and I get that x is equal to 4. And always remember to circle your answers. Step 4 tells me that I'm going to substitute for x and solve for xt. St is equal to 7x. X we just found to be 4. When I substitute and multiply, I get 28. Because it's a word problem, I want to make sure that I am restating my answer and circling it. Here is an example that you should try. Another key concept is congruent segments. And congruent segments and the word congruent is something that we are going to be using for the rest of the year. Here are two segments, A and B. A and B are congruent if they have the same measurement. So 1.9 and 1.9 means that they are congruent. If there are slashes on the shape that are the same numbers, if this has one black slash and this has one black slash, this means that they are congruent even if the 1.9 is not here. This is the symbol, an equal sign with an enye on top of it, is read is congruent to. This is the congruency symbol that we use, and we use a lot of symbols in geometry. Here's the statement, segment AB, the congruent symbol, and segment CD. This is read, segment AB is congruent to segment CD. Writing this is a lot shorter than writing this whole thing. Geometry is all about shorthand, and it is very important that you learn the symbols. I want to talk for a moment about something that is equal versus congruent, because they are a lot of similarities, but they are not the same thing. Lengths are equal and segments are congruent. So what does that mean? Well, length of 1.9 centimeters is equal to length 1.9 centimeters because they are both numbers. Segment AB is congruent to segment CD because they are things. Only lengths or measurements can be equal. Segments or things are congruent. If I'm going to say that lengths are equal, well, this is read, the length of AB is equal to the length of CD, or the length of AB is congruent to the length of CD. One of these is correct, and that is the first one. The length of AB is equal to the length of CD. However, segment AB is congruent to segment CD. Segments are never equal, only measurements. And I know this is a measurement because there is no symbol on top. Please make sure to bring any questions or concerns you have to class, and make sure to really study these notation symbols because they will be the key to your success in geometry.